He was just a kid back then, full of laughter and light. She spent her evenings twirling on her toes, practicing ballet steps as the sun painted the sky orange. Her dad, Javier, stood nearby, quietly watching her spin around like the happiest little dancer on earth. He told her how much she reminded him of her older sister, but that made her smile fade. She didn't remember ever having one. Noticing her sudden sadness, Javier crouched down, smiled, and handed her a delicate ballerina snow globe music box. "For my little star," he said gently, trying to cheer her up before heading out. But peace never stays for long. That very night, the house was hit by something straight out of a nightmare. Assassins rose from the dark water surrounding their home, gliding like shadows. They gunned down the guards outside and silently made their way in. Javier spotted a flicker of movement, and his instincts kicked in immediately. Before one of them could strike, he lunged forward, taking the man out in one swift move, then sprinted straight for Eve's room. He had trained her for moments like this, and though fear filled her eyes, she followed him without asking a single thing. Javier fought like a storm as more attackers swarmed in, dodging blades and firing shots with brutal precision. He managed to clear a path, then tucked Eve into a secret hiding spot and tossed a smoke grenade to cover her. The air turned into a gray cloud as he went back into the chaos, fists swinging and bullets flying. But even Javier, as skilled as he was, couldn't fight forever. There were just too many. Eventually, they overpowered him, and that's when the Chancellor strolled in, calm, cold, and cruel. He accused Javier of stealing something that was never his to take, reminding him he was only allowed into their order because they had given him their daughter. He claimed Javier's defiance had led to his wife's death, and now they were here to finish what was left. When the Chancellor demanded to know where Eve was, Javier spat at his feet, earning himself a hard blow to the face. He still didn't care. The Chancellor wasn't even angry. Instead, he pulled out a revolver, emptied it down to a single bullet, spun the cylinder, and snapped it shut with a click. "You wanted choices," he said coldly. "Shoot yourself, and we let your little girl live. Shoot me, and you both die." Javier clenched the gun, lifting it to his own head, ready to do it if it meant Eve would survive. But then, a small voice broke through the smoke. Eve's. She'd seen everything from her hiding spot and couldn't stay quiet anymore. Every eye turned toward her, and in that instant of distraction, Javier attacked like lightning. The Chancellor slipped away while Javier kept fighting desperately to keep Eve safe. One of the assassins almost drove a blade straight into Javier's eye, but Eve suddenly appeared, trembling yet fierce, and pulled the trigger, shooting the man dead. Javier immediately grabbed her trembling hands, whispering calming words, showing her the snow globe as if reminding her who she was, and let her out. He set off explosives behind them while they moved, though he took a bullet himself in the chaos. Still, he didn't stop. As they burst out of the burning house, the whole place went up in flames behind them. The Chancellor watched from the distance, then vanished into the night. Javier stumbled toward the ocean's edge, bleeding badly. He sank to his knees, eyes dimming, and softly told Eve he was sorry, that this wasn't the kind of life he wanted for her. With one last broken smile, he slumped forward and went still. Eve screamed his name, tears blurring her sight, but he was already gone. Hours later, she sat in a government building, silent and numb, just staring at the ballerina music box. That's when Winston appeared, a composed man with sharp eyes. He spoke gently about Javier, revealing he had once been part of a powerful family known as the Roma. Winston said they could take her to Javier's people, and with nothing left to hold on to, Eve let him lead her. He brought her to the Roma's leader, called the director, who spoke to her with warmth and told her, "They stole your past. Don't let them steal your future." Outside the office, Winston handed Eve a special coin, promising that if she ever needed him, he'd be there. Another member named Noy showed up, introducing herself and telling Eve stories about her father. Javier, she said, was known as a Kikimora, a spirit feared by the wicked but a protector to the innocent. 12 years swept by like wind. Eve grew into a striking young woman. She still danced, though ballet never came easily to her, and her trainers joked that if she didn't clean her wounds, she'd lose her feet to infection. But while she struggled at the bar, she was unmatched in hand-to-hand combat, blades and firearms. Even so, she seemed to be holding back, never pushing herself to her full edge. Noy, who now trained her, gave her a fierce but heartfelt pep talk one day, telling her to stop doubting herself. Something changed in Eve's eyes after that. She trained harder, faster, sharper. But then she noticed her friend Tatiana's bed empty in the dorms. Worried, she confronted the director. The answer was cold. Tatiana didn't have the instinct to kill, so she was placed on a different path. Where Eve carried pain, Tatiana carried only sadness. Soon after, Eve reached the final trial of her training, her first sanctioned kill. Technically, it was her second. She'd taken a life as a child that night long ago, but this one made it official. That night, she sat quietly, staring at her ballerina dome, until a noise drew her to the hall. Downstairs, she saw the director speaking with a tall man bearing a strange branded mark. It was John Wick, the infamous Baba Yaga. Eve boldly asked him how to leave this place and do what he did. Wick simply looked at her and said, "You still have a choice." It rattled her. Later, Noy assigned her first mission: protect a young woman named Katla Park. Katla's father feared rivals might kidnap her to get to him. Eve was handed a gun, only to find it loaded with rubber bullets. On the appointed night, Eve slipped into the neon haze of a club where Katla was partying. Through her comms, she confirmed her position to Noy. Moments later, suspicious men surrounded Katla, and when Eve spotted the danger in their eyes, she dove into action. Despite being outnumbered, she took them down one by one, fists and kicks flying, bullets snapping through the air. She took its two, but didn't back off. Finally, she cornered the leader, dragging Katla off. They clashed hard, but Eve snatched a pickaxe from a wall and used it to flip the fight in her favor. Katla hesitated to trust her after everything she'd seen, but Eve calmed her with soft words and led her safely out. That success earned Eve her official mark, a tattoo given only to true Kikimora of the Ruska Roma. She kept working quietly, taking contracts. She killed cleanly and got paid. One day, after clearing another mission, she carefully pulled her knives out of the lifeless bodies, looking like someone who couldn't even hurt a fly, and strolled toward her car. Out of nowhere, an SUV rammed her car violently. A man jumped out, firing at her. They fought savagely, shattering glass and twisting metal. He stabbed her in the shoulder, but she roared through the pain and killed him. As she caught her breath, her eyes locked on a symbol carved into his hand, and her mind flashed back to the same mark worn by the assassins who killed her father. She severed his hand and brought it to the director. "I've seen this before," she said, voice shaking. "This is the same mark as the ones who murdered my dad." The director stayed calm, explaining that those who carry the mark live without laws or mercy. Long ago, they made a pact. The Ruska Roma won't interfere with them, and they won't interfere with the Ruska Roma. Eve snapped, demanding why anyone would try to kidnap a child. The director's tone turned icy. Chasing them would only bring ruin. She forbade Eve from hunting them. Eve forced a nod, but the fire in her eyes told a different story. As expected, she went behind their backs. She visited the Continental Hotel and met Winston again. She told him her plan. When he asked what she'd do if he told her not to, she said she'd smile politely, then ignore him. Winston warned her that knowing what she sought might destroy her, comparing it to the Garden of Eden, how knowing too much got Adam and Eve cast out. Eve slid the old coin he'd given her across the table, her gaze unshaken. Finally, Winston gave in. He said it wasn't a tribe but a cult, a group that kills not just for profit but for pleasure. No one knew where they lived, but they were tracked when they stayed in hotels. One of them, a man named Daniel Pine, was currently at the Prague Continental. His bounty was $2 million. He'd booked room 315 and ordered enough ice cream to feed a small army. Winston passed her the file and wished her luck as she set off. In Prague, Eve checked into room 314. A group of hunters staking out Pine spotted her, but stayed hidden. She strapped her gun and slipped into Pine's room, unaware a sniper nearby was watching and reporting her moves to an underworld broker named Lena. Inside, she was startled to find a young girl. The girl said her name was Ella, and Eve quickly hid her gun. Pine appeared, gun drawn, calling Ella behind him. Eve told him about her father's murder by men with Pine's same mark, begging for information. Pine lowered his weapon, saying she had no idea what she'd just stepped into. Outside, Lena doubled Pine's bounty. All assassins in the hotel got the alert. Pine cursed, telling Eve she'd just made everything worse. The people she was hunting were already surrounding the hotel, waiting for someone like her to break the rules. Suddenly, the door burst open. Pine shot the first intruder clean in the skull. Bullets flew. Pine grabbed Ella and fled. while Eve fought off another assassin. She chased after Pine down the halls. He explained between gunfire that no one leaves the cult alive. They want Ella gone just to erase him. He begged Eve to help get Ella out, and he'd tell her where to find the cult. Reluctantly, she agreed. She carried Ella through the streets while Pine fought back the swarm. But he got shot, and Eve was struck from behind by Lena. When she woke, Ella was gone. Lena reported back to the Chancellor about the mission, and mentioned this unknown girl named Eve. Eve was later questioned at the Continental, but cleared. She hadn't broken any rules by defending herself. Most of the other assassins were found dead. Afterward, she headed to another secret establishment, holding up the photo of the cult's mark, ready to keep hunting. Even though the old shopkeeper had heard stories about that secretive cult, he made it clear he'd never worked with them and wanted to keep it that way. He preferred staying far from their chaos, knowing just enough to keep himself alive. Still, he led Eve over to a locked cabinet to show her the gun she'd asked about. But just as he opened the case, bullets tore through the air. A group of armed men stormed the place without warning. The shopkeeper bolted for the exit, leaving Eve to die behind a counter. Glass shattered everywhere as she ducked, returning a few quick shots to hold them off. Realizing she was outgunned, she scrambled out of the room, slamming and locking the heavy door behind her. She glanced around desperately. There weren't many weapons here. Then her eyes landed on an old bolt-action rifle on the wall and a crate marked with warning labels. Grenades. She grabbed the crate, yanked out a pin, and hurled it straight into the room just as the door buckled. The explosion ripped through the space, blasting one of the attackers apart. Eve used the chaos to leap from the balcony, landing hard but upright. More gunfire followed her as she darted between cover, tossing another grenade toward a man who charged at her. The blast hurled him through the air like a rag doll. By now, the entire shop was a shredded mess, smoke, debris, and fire everywhere. Eve pushed deeper into the building, climbing toward the gun room at the top. There, she found the shopkeeper crouched in a corner, shaken but alive. He was staring down at the lifeless body of one of the attackers, inspecting the strange, branded mark on the man's hand. When he saw it, his expression darkened. It was the same symbol she had described earlier, the mark of that cult. Sighing heavily, as though accepting his fate, he finally spoke. "Everyone who's ever gone looking for them disappears. Every single one," he muttered. "But people whisper they sometimes gather somewhere deep in the mountains, past Abery and Feldkirk." Eve thanked him quietly, also offering a quick apology for turning his shop into a war zone. He waved her off and handed her the keys to an old car out back. She loaded it with the bag of weapons she had managed to pay for before the chaos, and sped off toward the mountains. Unbeknownst to her, a sniper was watching from afar, his rifle aimed but finger off the trigger, simply tracking her movements. As she drove along the winding roads, Eve's comms suddenly buzzed. The voice of the director came through, sharp and cold. The woman demanded to know why Eve had defied her orders. Eve asked again who those marked people were, needing answers, but the director just repeated what she'd always said: "We don't interfere with them. Ever." She accused Eve of risking everything the Ruska Roma had built just to chase her own vengeance. If Eve didn't return immediately, she would be cut off. Eve simply ended the call. She wasn't turning back. Later, while refueling, she spotted a small roadside shop displaying delicate ballerina snow globes, just like the one Javier had given her as a child. She stepped inside, drawn to them, and for a brief moment her face softened. Then a truck screeched to a halt outside. A man strode in, calm and confident. Before she could even blink, he whipped out a gun and fired. But Eve moved like lightning. She flipped a table for cover as bullets ripped past. They clashed in a violent brawl that smashed shelves and shattered glass. He was quick, strong, and relentless, but she was faster. Eventually, she twisted his arm until it snapped, then emptied her pistol into his chest until he dropped. She pushed upstairs cautiously, only to be stopped by a young waitress holding a knife. Eve told her to relax, assuring her she wasn't going to hurt her, but the waitress suddenly lunged. Turns out, she wasn't just some waitress. She was as fast and deadly as Eve. They tore through the room, slamming each other into walls and counters. The fight devolved into them smashing plates over each other's heads in a mad scramble for a fallen gun. The waitress got it first, but Eve wrestled it away and locked her inside a back room. No time to rest, though. More assassins were arriving. Eve checked her ammo and frowned. Hardly any bullets left. Thinking fast, she taped a knife under the barrel of her pistol, making a makeshift bayonet. The first attacker stormed in and she slashed him down, which drew the rest. She darted between them like a blur, taking them out one after another, though a thrown blade buried itself in her back with a sickening thud. The door behind her splintered. The waitress had broken free and was aiming a gun at Eve's head. But Eve spun around and shot her first, dropping her instantly. Breathing hard, Eve yanked the knife from her own back, gritting her teeth through the pain. She then drove it straight into the throat of the man who had thrown it. "That's karma," she muttered coldly. She limped out of the wrecked building, but the distant sniper caught sight of her again and calmly reported through his radio, "Target not contained." Miles away, the Chancellor heard this and gave a chilling order. "Full protocols. Begin." Almost instantly, bells rang out from hidden loudspeakers across the town. The moment the sound echoed, locals hurried indoors, slamming shutters and locking doors. And from the shadows, armed assassins poured into the streets. Eve didn't yet realize what the bells meant. One stepped into her path and raised his gun. She was faster. One shot to the head dropped him. Another charged, and she took her down too, barely slowing. But more and more kept coming. For every one she dropped, two more replaced him. A blade slashed across her back, but she spun and buried her knife in the attacker's chest. She was panting, bleeding, and surrounded. Then Lena appeared. While Eve tried to hold her ground, Lena swung the butt of her rifle into Eve's skull. The world went black. Somewhere else, the Chancellor sat across from young Ella. She asked about her father, voice trembling. The Chancellor coldly replied that Pine had been trying to take her away from her real family. Ella glared at him, declaring she hated him. Before he could respond, Lena entered quietly and told him something shocking. Eve was Ruskaroma. Moments later, Eve woke up in a dim room, wrists tied. The Chancellor sat calmly across from her. He told her how long ago he and the director had agreed on their separate duties in this hidden world. Eve snapped that the Ruskaroma had nothing to do with this. The Chancellor disagreed. He leaned closer and asked why she was here. If she had come for Ella, he warned she was mistaken. Ella was his granddaughter and would one day inherit everything. Then he dropped another bombshell. Pine was his son. Eve's eyes widened. "You put a kill contract on your own son?" The Chancellor just gave a cold laugh. He explained this town was a place where people like her could live, settle down, even raise families, if they accepted the order of things. Eve's voice cracked with fury. She told him she had a family once, and his people slaughtered them and tried to take her. She described Javier's execution, how they murdered her father in front of her. That last part seemed to surprise him. He muttered something about fate, then left. Outside, he spoke quietly with Lena, revealing the final twist. Eve was her sister. Lena froze. Before she could even process it, gunshots thundered from her room. Eve had broken loose and cut down her guards. She burst out, and when another assassin tried to shoot her, Lena unexpectedly shot the man first, letting Eve escape. The Chancellor frowned, confused by Lena's choice, but she simply followed after Eve. Eve slipped into an old building and aimed her gun at Lena as soon as she entered. But Lena blurted out the truth. "We're sisters." Eve froze, stunned. Lena explained they were both born in this town. It was their real home. Eve spat that they were nothing alike, that Lena's people had murdered her father. Lena shot back that Javier was their father, too. But he betrayed them, and their mother had paid the price for it. The Chancellor had only tried to save Eve, to bring her back where she belonged. Eve shouted that Javier was just trying to give her a normal life. "There's nothing normal about me," Lena whispered bitterly. "That's because you chose this," Eve snapped. "They forced me." Outside, an assassin radioed their location to the Chancellor. He ordered both sisters eliminated. The assassin hesitated, but the order was repeated. Grenades smashed through the windows. Eve and Lena barely had time to run before the room erupted in fire. When the smoke cleared, Eve was crawling across the floor, half deaf from the blast. Lena lay nearby, barely breathing. "I was 9 when they told me you were dead," Lena gasped. "I missed you." Her eyes closed for good. Rage burned through Eve's pain. The assassins entered to confirm their kill, but Eve rose like a fury, cutting them all down with a blade. She snatched a radio and growled into it. "It's not over until you're dead." Far away, the Chancellor was already contacting the director, declaring war on the Ruskaroma. The director warned him to call off his men, suggesting she send someone capable instead. He gave her until midnight. She coldly agreed. Noy whispered, "Eve is family. She made her choice," the director replied. The someone capable turned out to be John Wick. The Chancellor made an announcement to everyone in town. No one was to engage until the bells rang again. Any who disobeyed would be cast out forever. Eve overheard it and frowned, wondering what game he was playing. Then she saw John Wick in the distance and realized the director had sent him to kill her. He told her calmly, "It's your choice to walk away." She reminded him those were her exact words to him years ago. He just repeated, "It's still your choice." She dropped her bag and stood tall. "I'm not leaving." Then she fired. They fought viciously, crashing through walls. He was better. Eventually, he had her on the ground, knife at her throat. "Leave," he ordered. She lunged anyway. Again and again, he told her to walk away, but she kept attacking until he pressed his gun to her face. "They kill my father," she hissed. "I finished this." He stared at her and lowered the gun. "You have 28 minutes, he said quietly, and walked away. Eve stormed the Chancellor's fortress like a hurricane. Assassins swarmed her, and she shredded them with machine gun fire. Inside the armory, she loaded up on every weapon she could carry, though a sniper tracked her every step. The Chancellor ordered his top killer, Dex, to hunt her down. Dex came with a blowtorch. Eve ambushed squads through the tunnels, setting them ablaze. Dex struck back with roaring flames, setting her coat on fire. She doused it and kept fighting, torching more attackers. Dex's leg caught fire, but he didn't even flinch. She ran out of fuel. He blasted again. She grabbed an industrial hose and sprayed water, flame against water until both gave out. Then from above, John Wick sniped Dex, blowing him apart. Wick disabled the speakers while gunning down squads of assassins with surgical precision. Eve spotted the Chancellor's car and saw Ella inside. Wick held off attackers while Eve blew the car's tires, then killed the sniper driving it. The Chancellor climbed out, seething. He told her she couldn't change anything, that the system would live on. She had never had a choice, just like Lena, just like Ella. Eve only looked at Ella, then shot the Chancellor dead. From the rooftop, Wick didn't stop her. He simply called the director and said, "He's gone." Ella was returned to Pine, who was alive but recovering. He hugged her tightly. Eve met Winston one last time. He wished her well, but warned her, cutting off the head of the snake doesn't kill the body. They would come for her. Back at her quarters, the director found a ballerina snow globe waiting on her desk. Eve slipped quietly into a dark theater to watch Tatiana dance. Then her phone buzzed. The contract service had just placed a new bounty, $5 million, on her head. Eve smiled faintly, but that was a problem for another day.